The memories of that exam day in my past life returned with terrifying clarity. Standing outside the hall, my eyes fixed on that familiar car in the distance. Everything came rushing back. Last time, he'd sped like a madman after his first love and crashed horribly. To pull him from the wreck, I missed 2 critical exams. Later, to help him through therapy, I gave up aerospace engineering for nursing. I'd foolishly thought years of devotion would earn his love. But on his deathbed, he coldly left everything to his first love. He called me just a live-in maid, while she was an elegant ballerina who needed comfort. He even accused me of causing the crash to come between them, saying I'd guilt him into staying and ruined his life. He said if he could do it over, he'd rather rot disabled than be with me. All those years of sacrifice, he erased them without a thought. I'd signed away my rights to his estate, whispered okay, and closed my eyes. When I opened them, I was back at our final exams. This time, I'd play dumb. His life, his choices, his mistakes, none of it concerned me anymore. In this life, I'd live only for myself. The final bell had just rung when my dad grabbed my arm, practically dragging me into the passenger seat of our car. He started the engine while my mom filled me in on the panic. Did you know Ziad was secretly dating someone? Well, she dumped him right before the exams today, and Ziad. I didn't need to hear the rest. I already knew it by heart. Just like in my previous life, Ziad took off in his dad's car to chase after his girlfriend, crashed, and permanently destroyed his legs. The only difference was that this time, I stood by and watched him drive off to his doom, then calmly walked back inside to finish my afternoon exams. By the time we rushed to the hospital, 2 surgeons were just stepping out of the operating room, looking absolutely exhausted. The crash was catastrophic, and there was a delay in getting the rescue teams to the site. We managed to save his life, but there is a very high probability he will never walk again. If the post-op recovery goes poorly, we might be looking at a double amputation. The moment those words left the doctor's mouth, Ziad's mother, Valerie, broke down into agonizing sobs. Mr. Prescott held his wife up, his own face contorted in devastating grief. My parents stood frozen in shock, completely speechless. It's just such a shame. Ziad worked so hard in school all these years, only for this to happen on the most important day of his life, my mom whispered. My dad shot her a warning look, silently telling her to shut her mouth. When they finally wheeled Ziad out, all 4 parents swarmed the gurney. I was the only one hanging back, staring blankly at my own hands. They were slender and smooth. There were no thick calluses. My knuckles weren't swollen and deformed from years of washing his dirty bedsheets in freezing water. I really had been reborn, and I had actually finished my exams this afternoon. In my past life, Ziad's first love, Stella, had coldly dumped him on the morning of our finals. Desperate to win her back, Ziad stole his dad's car and sped after her without a second thought. I had seen him speed off. Terrified for his safety, I hopped in a cab and followed him, which meant I witnessed the gruesome crash with my own eyes. To get him to the hospital as fast as possible, I missed my 2 afternoon exams. I was a straight-A student who regularly scored near the absolute top of the state, but my final score was completely ruined. I originally planned to take a gap year and retake the exams, but Ziad suddenly dropped to his knees and confessed his love to me. He told me, the doctor said if you hadn't risked your life to pull me out of that burning car, they would have had to amputate both my legs. You gave up your exams for me. You sacrificed your dream of aerospace engineering. I want to spend the rest of my life taking care of you. That is, if you don't mind being with a cripple. My years of secret, unrequited love for him had suddenly blossomed into reality. At that moment, my brain totally short-circuited. But what about Stella? I had stammered. Ziad's eyes had filled with pure venom. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be in this wheelchair. I hate her guts. After hesitating for a day, and listening to Ziad swear up and down that he couldn't survive without me, my stupidly romantic heart gave in. I gave up the major I was born for. To help him walk again, I enrolled in a nursing program. For the next couple of decades, my entire existence revolved around his physical therapy. He claimed he hated having strangers in the house, so I was the only one who cooked his meals, washed his clothes, and massaged his atrophied muscles every single day. I waited on him hand and foot until he finally managed to stand on his own 2 feet again. When he refused to wallow in self-pity and decided to start his own tech company, I was the one running around, behind the scenes, handling all the grunt work. But on the night his company finally went public, during the lavish celebration banquet, I overheard him talking to his executive assistant. "Did you manage to hire Stella as my +1 for night?" The assistant nodded, hesitating. "Yes, Mr. Prescott. But what about your wife?" Ziad looked at his own impeccably tailored reflection in the mirror and let out a cold sneer. "My wife? Please. She's just the hired help." I had stood frozen behind the heavy oak doors, my fingers turning white as I gripped the fabric of my evening gown in utter humiliation. Maybe God finally took pity on me, because not long after, Ziad suffered massive complications from his old injuries and ended up back in the ICU. But right before he flatlined, he transferred every single penny of his massive estate to Stella. He even had his lawyers drain our joint accounts, giving the meager savings I had built up to her as well. "Harper, you and her are fundamentally different," he had gasped out. "You are a maid, but she is an artist. She has lived an elegant life, and she needs this money to keep her comfortable. Besides, if you hadn't staged that entire car crash back then to play the hero, she and I would never have broken up in the first place. You used a fake life debt to chain me down. You ruined my entire life. If I had the chance to do it all over again, I would rather rot in a wheelchair than ever let you touch me." After serving him like a slave for half my life, I was left absolutely penniless, with nothing to my name but the calluses on my hands. In my past life, I paid the ultimate price for being blindingly, foolishly in love. This time, I stood in complete silence, watching Mr. and Mrs. Prescott cry their eyes out. "He's our only son. Christoph and I poured everything we had into him. Ziad was always such a brilliant, perfect kid. Why did he have to go and fall for some girl?" I already asked around. That girl is just some performing arts student with terrible grades. The final exams didn't even matter to her. But she had no right to destroy Ziad's life on the most important day of the year. Valerie sobbed hysterically. My mom sighed in sympathy. That girl really is something else. Ziad nearly died for her, and she hasn't even bothered to show up at the hospital. A flash of pure hatred crossed Valerie's face as she abruptly stood up. "We are reasonable people, but that little tramp ruined my son. The least she can do is get her ass down here and apologize." Valerie was about to storm out to hunt Stella down, but before she could take 2 steps, agonizing screams erupted. From inside the hospital room, "Stella, Stella." I followed the panicked parents into the room, lingering near the back. Ziad's head was heavily bandaged, and both of his legs were locked into thick braces. He was thrashing wildly, desperately trying to sit up but failing miserably. Because I hadn't chased after him this time, rumor had it that Ziad was trapped unconscious in the crushed car for over an hour before a passing teacher finally spotted the wreck and called 911. The delay in medical attention meant his spinal injuries were far more severe. The surgeons had warned that the odds of amputation were terrifyingly high. Valerie rushed to the bedside, choking back her tears. "Don't move, sweetie. The doctors said you absolutely cannot move. Your incisions haven't even begun to heal." Ziad stared down at his legs, blinking in confusion before forcing a weak, nonchalant smile. "It's fine, Mom. It's just a couple of broken bones, right? It's not a big deal. Look, I can still move them." Ziad tried to shift his legs. Nothing happened. The forced smile on his face slowly froze. As he tried again and again, sheer panic began to bleed into his features. "Why can't I move my legs? It's just the anesthesia, right? It just hasn't worn off yet, right?" His parents stood there with tears streaming down their faces, completely unable to form the words. "Say something. Tell me what's wrong." Ziad frantically slammed his fist onto the nurse call button. The moment a nurse rushed in, he cornered her with panicked demands. "What happened to my legs? Tell me right now. What is wrong with my legs?" The young nurse recoiled in shock. Just as she opened her mouth to explain, Ziad suddenly started violently punching his own thighs. Why can't I feel anything? He was completely hysterical. It took 3 people to physically pin him down to the mattress. Watching him thrash around like a pathetic worm, a dark, twisted sense of satisfaction blossomed in my chest. I stepped up to the edge of the bed and looked down at him, enunciating every single word. Keep punching them. Right now, your legs are just paralyzed. But if you keep smashing your own crushed bones, they'll just amputate them entirely. Ziad stiffened instantly, as if the word paralyzed was a bullet that had just struck him in the chest. Be paralyzed? Valerie finally broke down, wailing in absolute despair. Mr. Prescott rubbed his face tiredly. Your mother and I know exactly what happened today. Now that you're in this state, that's Stella girl. Before his dad could even finish the sentence, Ziad snapped. This has nothing to do with Stella. It was my fault. I was driving too fast. I lowered my eyes to hide my smirk. So this is what blind devotion looks like. She literally caused you to become a paraplegic, yet you still defend her honor in front of everyone? No matter how you looked at it, this car crash had absolutely zero to do with me. Yet in my past life, Ziad had ruthlessly pinned the entire blame on my shoulders without a shred of guilt. The difference between who he loved and who he used was glaringly obvious. In my past life, he said he'd rather rot as a cripple than have anything to do with me. Well, in this life, he gets to be a cripple, and I get to go to my dream college. Everybody wins. This time around, I didn't volunteer to stay overnight at the hospital. I sat in the plastic chair for 20 minutes, then quietly went home. But the very next day, the stress and trauma caused Valerie to physically collapse. She was admitted to the hospital herself. To make matters worse, the media caught wind of the fact that a high school senior had caused a massive pileup while driving without a valid license. The internet was tearing Ziad to shreds. Mr. Prescott couldn't handle the fallout alone. Out of desperation, my mom forced me to go to the hospital to help out, since my exams were officially over. When I walked into his room, the flicker of hope in Ziad's eyes instantly died when he realized it was me. I ignored him entirely. I just pulled up a chair in the corner and played on my phone, strictly treating my presence as a required chore. But when it was time to change his dressings, Ziad turned into an absolute nightmare. Bed 18, time to change your bandages, the nurse said gently. Ziad whipped his head around, his eyes completely bloodshot. Get out. The nurse sighed, clearly exhausted but completely unsurprised. She looked like she had dealt with 100 patients exactly like him. If we don't clean the wounds, the necrotic tissue will spread. It's going to get much worse. She stepped forward and reached out to unwrap the gauze around his shattered knee. I said, get out. Ziad violently swatted his arm out, knocking the metal medical tray right out of her hands. Bottles of iodine and sterilized tools crashed onto the linoleum floor with a deafening clatter. I frowned and stood up. In my past life, Ziad had struggled to accept his paralysis too, but he was never this much of a violent bastard about it. I quickly replayed the memories in my head and realized the difference. In my previous life, after the crash, I had personally hunted Stella down and begged her to visit him. Back then, Stella had arrived at the hospital wearing a pale pink sweater and tears on her cheeks. The second Ziad saw her, his entire emotional state changed. He grabbed her hand like a drowning man clinging to driftwood and whispered over and over that he was sorry. She cried beautifully. That was the only way I could describe it. Every tear looked delicate and tragic, like something out of a movie scene. Even the nurses softened toward her. She sat beside his bed for hours, apologizing for the breakup, saying she only pushed him away because she felt pressured by his wealthy parents and didn't want to ruin his future. Ziad had completely melted. By the third day, he stopped fighting the nurses. By the second week, he started physical therapy. By the third month, Stella disappeared again. And I was the idiot who stayed behind to pick up the pieces. But this time, I hadn't gone to find her. And clearly, Stella had no intention of coming on her own. The nurse crouched down with a sigh, picking scattered instruments off the floor. Mr. Prescott, if you continue behaving like this, we will have to sedate you. Then sedate me, Ziad roared. His voice cracked halfway through the sentence. For a split second, the room fell silent, because beneath all the rage, all the violence, all the denial, everyone heard it.
Fear.
Pure, animalistic terror. His hands started trembling uncontrollably. My legs, he whispered hoarsely. I can't feel anything. The nurse's expression softened slightly. Spinal trauma recovery takes time. Stop lying to me, he screamed. He grabbed the water cup beside the bed and hurled it straight at the wall. It exploded everywhere. I leaned back in my chair and calmly continued scrolling through university admission forums on my phone. In my previous life, seeing him like this would have shattered me. I would have rushed over immediately, held his hand, reassured him, begged him not to give up.
Now?
I felt nothing. Actually, that wasn't true. I felt relieved. Relieved that this nightmare finally belonged to someone else. Ziad suddenly noticed what I was reading on my screen. His bloodshot eyes narrowed. College applications? I didn't even look up. You still plan to go? That made me glance at him. The question itself was ridiculous. Obviously. His expression changed instantly. Confusion. Then disbelief. Then something uglier. You, his voice was strained. You're just leaving? I almost laughed. Leaving? In his mind, had I ever belonged there in the first place? The nurse finally managed to rewrap part of his bandages while he sat frozen, staring at me like he'd never seen me before. I have orientation interviews next month, I said casually. And if my scores are high enough, I'll probably leave the province entirely. The room became deathly quiet. Valerie looked between us uncertainly, like she finally sensed something strange beneath the surface. In my past life, everyone took it for granted that I would stay, that I would sacrifice, that Harper would naturally give things up for Ziad Prescott because Harper loved him so much. It had become such an unquestioned truth that nobody ever stopped to ask whether I wanted a future of my own. Ziad stared at me for a long time before speaking again. You knew. I looked up slowly. His breathing became ragged. Yesterday, before the crash, you saw me leave. I said nothing. His fingers curled violently into the sheets. You knew something would happen. The room's atmosphere shifted instantly. My mother's face paled. My dad frowned sharply. Valerie looked confused. What is he talking about? But Ziad couldn't stop now. His eyes locked onto mine with growing intensity, like he was trying to force an answer out of me. In the past, you would have followed me. My heart skipped exactly once. For one terrifying second, I thought,
no.
Impossible. There was no way he remembered too. But then he continued. You've chased after me for years. Everyone knows that. If you saw me driving off upset, why didn't you stop me? So that was it. Not memories. Entitlement. Even now, somewhere deep in his subconscious, Ziad still believed my life should revolve around him. I met his gaze calmly. Why would I? The words landed like a slap. Ziad went completely still. I tilted my head slightly. You're not my responsibility. His face lost all color. Valerie looked horrified. Harper, but I wasn't finished. You stole a car without a license, sped recklessly through traffic, and caused a pileup because your girlfriend dumped you before exams. I shrugged lightly. Those were your choices. Ziad stared at me as though every sentence physically wounded him. And, honestly, I added softly, you should be grateful you only lost your legs. Harper, my mother hissed. But I ignored her, because for the first time in 2 lifetimes I finally understood something. Ziad never loved me. Not once. He loved being loved by me. He loved having someone willing to destroy herself for him. The moment I stopped offering unconditional devotion, he looked at me like I had betrayed him, just like he had in his hospital bed before dying, just like he had while handing every piece of our life to another woman. Ziad's breathing suddenly turned uneven, then harsher, then frantic. The heart monitor beside him started screaming. The nurse's face changed instantly. Call the doctor, now. Valerie rushed forward in panic. Ziad. But his eyes never left mine. And for the very first time since I met him, I saw fear in them. Not fear of paralysis. Not fear of pain, fear that I truly did not love him anymore. The results came out 2 weeks later. I ranked first in the entire province. Perfect scores in physics and mathematics. Near perfect everywhere else. My phone exploded with calls before sunrise. Prestigious universities fought over me so aggressively it almost felt unreal. Scholarships, research programs, international exchange opportunities, professors personally reaching out. The Aerospace Engineering Department at Massachusetts Institute of Technology sent me a handwritten congratulations letter. When I opened the envelope, my hands actually shook. In my past life, I had buried that dream alive with my own 2 hands. This time, the dream survived. And so did I. Meanwhile, the internet absolutely devoured Ued. News articles spread everywhere about the wealthy honor student who stole a luxury car, caused a multi-vehicle collision, and permanently crippled himself days before graduation. People dug up eyewitness accounts about his reckless speeding. Insurance companies sued the Prescotts. Victims from the pileup demanded compensation. The Prescott family reputation collapsed almost overnight. Then Stella publicly posted a crying video claiming she had nothing to do with the accident and that Ued had become emotionally obsessive after their breakup. She leaked screenshots, too. Messages of him begging her not to leave. Promises to buy her things. Plans to run away together. The comments tore him apart. Desperate. Pathetic. Psychotic. The golden boy image he spent 18 years building disintegrated in less than a month. And Stella? The second she realized the Prescotts were bleeding money from lawsuits and medical expenses, she vanished completely. No visits. No calls. Nothing. Apparently, true love had very strict financial requirements. By the end of summer, Valerie looked like she'd aged 10 years. Mr. Prescott quietly sold one of their properties. And Ued became unbearable. He screamed at nurses, threw things during therapy, refused visitors. Nobody could stand being around him for long, except me, because unlike everyone else, I enjoyed it immensely. The day before my flight overseas, my parents insisted we visit the hospital one last time out of courtesy. When I walked into the room wearing my university hoodie, Ued looked up from his wheelchair and froze. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and bitterness. He looked thinner now. His once meticulously styled hair hung messily over hollow eyes. Physical therapy had restored partial movement to one leg, but the other remained almost useless. The doctors said he'd likely need assistance walking for the rest of his life. The moment he saw the MIT logo on my chest, something inside him visibly cracked. "You got in." I smiled brightly. Full scholarship. His fingers tightened on the wheelchair armrest. Valerie forced a weak smile. "That's wonderful, Harper." "It really is," I said cheerfully. I pulled out my phone and showed my parents pictures from the campus orientation program. Modern labs. Flights, simulators. Research facilities bigger than entire schools. My dad looked proud enough to burst into tears. My mom kept wiping her eyes. I laughed while swiping through photos. They're even letting first years participate in propulsion research projects. One professor said my entrance scores were among the best he'd seen in years. Every sentence landed like another knife in Ued's chest. Because he remembered. He remembered who I used to be. Before I wasted decades shrinking myself around him. Aerospace engineering had always been my world. Not nursing. Not caregiving. Not becoming someone's unpaid servant. Him. He was the detour. And now the detour was gone. Ued stared at the photos silently before finally speaking in a rough voice. "You seem happy." I looked at him. Really looked at him. The boy I once loved more than my own future sat slumped in a wheelchair, surrounded by dying flowers and hospital walls. And strangely enough, I felt grateful. Because if he had loved me back even a little, I might have ruined myself for him all over again. "I am happy," I said honestly. Then I smiled wider. Happier than I've ever been. Something inside him shattered completely. His eyes reddened instantly. "You moved on that fast." I almost laughed at the absurdity. Fast? He had taken decades from me in my previous life, my dreams, my career, my youth,
My body.
my love, and in the end, he still called me a maid. I stepped closer until I stood directly in front of him. Then I leaned down slightly and spoke softly enough that only he could hear. You once told me you'd rather stay crippled forever than be with me. Ziad's breathing stopped. I smiled sweetly. Congratulations. The color drained from his face. I guess you finally got your wish. His eyes filled instantly with devastation. Not anger, not hatred, regret. Raw, unbearable regret. For the first time, he truly understood what he had thrown away. Not because I saved him, not because I served him, but because without me, his life became empty astonishingly fast. Meanwhile, mine only became brighter. I straightened and turned toward the door. Behind me, his voice cracked apart. Harper. I paused. For a brief second, the old me stirred. The girl who would have run back immediately. The girl who would have forgiven anything if he sounded sad enough. But she was gone now, buried in another lifetime. I glanced back one final time. Ziad sat alone in the fading afternoon light, broken and miserable, staring at me like I was the last good thing left in the world. Too bad for him. This time, I chose myself. And then I walked out of the room smiling, straight into the future that had been waiting for me all along.